Close your eyes and take yourself back to a Saturday evening in 1987. You're walking down Martin Luther King Jr. Drive in Atlanta, and that smell hits you before you even see the neon sign. Fried chicken crackling in cast iron, collard greens simmering with smoked turkey necks, and cornbread so fresh it's still steaming in the pan. You push through those heavy glass doors at Paschal's restaurant, and immediately you're home. The red vinyl booths packed with families still dressed in their church clothes, the sound of forks scraping against those thick white plates. And somewhere in the back booth, you might catch a glimpse of folks in suits having what looks like a serious conversation about something bigger than Sunday dinner. This was our world. This was where we gathered, where we planned, where we fed our bodies and our souls. But if you go looking for that feeling today, walking down those same streets, you'll find something heartbreaking. Those spaces are gone. Not just closed, not just changed ownership, but erased. Wiped clean like they never mattered at all. What happened to our restaurants wasn't just business closing, it was cultural disappearance. Between the 1990s and 2010s, we watched as gentrification, rise in rents, and the loss of our elders took away the places where Black life happened. The spots where 3 generations would crowd around the same table on Sunday, where civil rights strategies were whispered over plates of catfish, where the auntie behind the counter knew your order before you opened your mouth. These weren't just places to eat. They were the living rooms of our communities, the places where our culture lived and breathed and got passed down. Today, we're taking a journey back to remember these sacred spaces, to honor what we lost, and to understand why their disappearance represents something much deeper than empty storefronts. If you're loving this trip back to when our neighborhoods were truly ours, hit that subscribe button for Black Then. We're here to keep these memories alive and celebrate the spaces that made us who we are. And please drop your own memories in the comments. I want to hear about the soul food spot in your city that meant everything to your family. Now, let's walk through these hallowed halls one more time. Let's start where the movement started, at Paschal's restaurant in Atlanta. When Robert and James Paschal opened their doors in 1947 on what was then West Hunter Street, they created more than a restaurant. They built a headquarters for change. Picture this. It's 1960 and you walk into Paschal's on any given evening. The main dining room is buzzing with the usual crowd, families sharing plates of their famous fried chicken, couples on dates splitting slices of sweet potato pie that could make you weep. But if you knew where to look, if you knew the right people, you might find yourself invited to the back room or upstairs to the penthouse. That's where Martin Luther King Jr. would sit with his closest advisors, where John Lewis and other young activists would plan their next moves, where the strategies that would change America were sketched out on napkins between bites of cornbread. The food at Paschal's wasn't just sustenance, it was armor for the fight ahead. Those activists filled up on plates of smothered pork chops, mac and cheese that stuck to your ribs, and green beans cooked with just enough pork to remind you of your grandmother's kitchen. They'd wash it down with sweet tea so thick you could stand a spoon in it, and somehow, fortified by that food and that fellowship, they'd find the strength to face police dogs and fire hoses the next day. La Carousel, the jazz lounge attached to the restaurant, brought in national acts. Folks like Aretha Franklin and B.B. King would perform, and the whole place would pulse with music that felt like freedom itself. But by 1996, the original Paschal's was gone. The neighborhood changed, property values rose, and the building that once housed the heartbeat of the civil rights movement became something else entirely. Yes, the Paschal's name lives on in other locations, but that specific space, those walls that witnessed history, that corner where revolution was planned over Sunday dinner, that's lost forever. Standing where Paschal's used to be, you'd never know that this patch of Atlanta concrete once changed the world. Now, if you wanted to grab a bite after those late-night strategy sessions, you might have headed over to B.B. Beeman's restaurant. This place opened its doors in 1961, right in the thick of the movement, and B.B. Beeman knew exactly what his community needed: a 24-hour spot where folks could gather any time of day or night. Picture pulling up to B.B. Beeman's at 2 a.m. after a long day of organizing or protesting. The neon sign still flickering in the window, the smell of bacon grease and coffee drawing you in like a beacon. Inside, those red vinyl stools lined up at the counter, and behind it, B.B. himself or one of his trusted cooks flipping eggs and sliding plates of grits across that Formica countertop. The beauty of B.B. Beeman's was in its constancy. Whether you needed breakfast at dawn before heading out to march, or you needed a safe place to decompress at midnight after a day that tested your faith, BBS was there. The jukebox in the corner playing Sam Cooke and Otis Redding, the steam rising from cups of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, the sound of seasoned cast iron sizzling with whatever comfort you needed. Civil rights leaders would slip in through the back door, grab a booth in the corner, and continue their conversations over plates of fried chicken that BB somehow managed to keep crispy even in the middle of the night. But like so many of our gathering places, BB Beeman's couldn't survive the changes that swept through Atlanta. The building was eventually demolished, taking with it not just a restaurant, but a piece of Black Atlanta soul. Today, you can't even find the spot where it used to stand. Development and urban renewal have erased it so completely that even the memory seems to be fading. The story wasn't just unfolding in Atlanta, though. Up in Atlantic City, Clifton Dewars, Washington, had been serving our community since 1937 at Wash's restaurant. Think about that. This man was feeding our people for 75 years, from before the war through the civil rights movement, through disco, through hip-hop, through the Obama years. Wash's Inn wasn't just a restaurant. It was a generational anchor. Your grandmother ate there as a young woman. Your mother had her first date there, and you brought your own children there for Sunday dinner. The staying power of Wash's came from understanding what soul food really means to our community. It wasn't about fancy presentation or trendy ingredients. It was about consistency, about knowing that every time you walked through those doors, the collard greens would taste like your great-aunt's recipe, the cornbread would be just sweet enough, and the fried chicken would have that perfect crunch that only comes from a lifetime of practice. Wash knew that when people came to his restaurant, they weren't just hungry for food. Picture walking into Wash's on a Sunday afternoon in the 1980s. The place packed with families still in their church clothes, children fidgeting in their good shoes while their mothers fixed their plates from the buffet. The sound of gospel music mixing with conversation and laughter. The sight of 3 generations squeezed around the same table, the older folks making sure the young ones tried everything. Just don't just eat the mac and cheese, a grandmother would say, or taste these greens, taste this history. But even Wash's incredible run had to end. In 2012, after 75 years of feeding our community, the doors closed for good. Another piece of our culinary heritage gone. Speaking of places that bridge generations, let's talk about Army and Lou's on Chicago's South Side. When Army and Lou opened their doors in 1945, they created something special in the heart of Black Chicago, a place where the Great Migration generation could taste home while building new lives in the Windy City. Army and Lou's became legendary for their fried chicken, but it was so much more than that. This was where Chicago's Black elite would gather, where politicians would make deals, where families would celebrate graduations and mourn losses and mark every important moment with a shared meal. The dining room at Army and Lou's told the story of Black Chicago's success. Photographs of famous patrons lined the walls. The tables were always set with real cloth napkins, and the service had a dignity that reminded you that this wasn't just a restaurant, it was an institution. The menu read like a love letter to Southern cooking transplanted to the urban North. Catfish that flaked perfectly with each bite, turkey and dressing that rivaled any family recipe, and sides that could make a meal by themselves. Their green beans weren't just vegetables, they were testimony, cooked with enough smoked meat to remind you where you came from. But in 2010, after 65 years of anchoring the South Side, Army & Lou served its last meal. The neighborhood had changed, the customer base had shifted, and like so many of our places, the economic pressures became too much to bear. The building still stands, but it houses something else now, something that never knew the weight of the conversations that happened in those booths, the importance of the deals that were struck over dinner, the comfort that place provided to generations of Chicago families. Now down in Houston, the story played out in neighborhoods like the 3rd Ward and 5th Ward, where small family-owned soul food joints anchored communities that the rest of the city tried to ignore. These weren't fancy places. We're talking about spots with handwritten menus, folding chairs, and aunties behind the counter who would lecture you about eating your vegetables while piling your styrofoam plate so high you could barely close the container. The names might not have made it into history books, but these places matter just as much to their communities as any famous restaurant. Picture walking into one of these Houston soul food spots on a Wednesday evening. The smell hits you first, that deep, rich aroma of a roux that's been stirred with patience and love, the sweet scent of cornbread baking, the smoky perfume of meat that's been seasoned and cooked until it falls off the bone. The counter lined with church ladies who could size you up with one look and know whether you needed a regular portion or the kind of meal that would heal whatever was hurting you. These women were more than cooks. They were the keepers of our culture, the ones who made sure recipes didn't die with the previous generation. But as Houston grew and changed, as the inner city neighborhoods that housed these treasures became valuable real estate, one by one, these family restaurants disappeared. Not because they weren't loved, not because the food wasn't incredible, but because the families who ran them couldn't compete with rising rents and changing demographics. The knowledge that took decades to perfect, the recipes that were never written down, the comfort that could only come from being cooked for by someone who truly understood your hunger, all of that gone. The same story echoed in Seattle's Central District, where soul food restaurants served the community that migrated there during World War II to work in the shipyards and aircraft factories. These Seattle soul food spots had their own flavor, influenced by the Pacific Northwest, but rooted in the same traditions of hospitality and nourishment that define Black cooking everywhere. The Central District was our neighborhood, and the restaurants there were our gathering places, spots where you could get a plate of ribs with a side of conversation about everything from politics to church gossip to which high school had the best football team. But Seattle's gentrification story is particularly painful because it happened so quickly and so completely. The Central District that once housed thriving Black-owned businesses became one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. And families that had been there for generations found themselves priced out of their own community. The soul food restaurants that had anchored the neighborhood for decades couldn't survive the transformation, not just because of rising costs, but because their customers, the families who had supported them for generations, were forced to move further and further away from the places they called home. What makes these losses even more heartbreaking is understanding what these restaurants meant beyond just food. They were the places where our children learned how to behave in public, where they watched adults conduct business and solve problems and take care of each other. A child sitting in a soul food restaurant would absorb lessons that went far beyond table manners. They'd learn about respect, about community responsibility, about the importance of feeding people well. They'd watch their grandmother slide an extra piece of cornbread to the elderly man at the next table, see their mother chat with the owner about family news, Observe the quiet dignity with which the servers treated every customer, regardless of how much money they had to spend. These restaurants were also our economic engines. When we talk about Black Wall Streets and Black business districts, we often focus on the banks and the theaters and the hotels, but the soul food restaurants were the daily heartbeat of those communities. They employed our neighbors, bought from our suppliers, sponsored our Little League teams and church events. A successful soul food restaurant could anchor an entire block, drawing foot traffic that supported the barbershop next door, the beauty salon across the street, the small grocery store on the corner. When these restaurants closed, they took that economic ecosystem with them. The timing of these closures wasn't coincidental. The 1990s and 2000s saw an acceleration of urban development that prioritized bringing wealthier, often whiter residents back to city centers. Neighborhoods that had been ignored for decades suddenly became desirable, and the families and businesses that had maintained those communities through the tough years found themselves unwelcome in the new and improved versions of their own neighborhoods.